The sun sagged low behind the jagged Arizona cliffs, bleeding warm copper light over the canyon floor. As Luke Maddox rode slowly along the narrow trail, dust clung to his boots, his coat, even the sweat-darkened mane of his horse. He had been tracking the 3 horse thieves for nearly 48 hours with barely a moment's rest. The prints in the sand told him he was close. Too close to turn back, but they also led him deeper into Apache land. Most cowboys would turn around at the first sign of tribal boundary markers, but Luke had never been good at quitting, not when a man's dying wish rested on his shoulders. He pushed forward, letting the desert silence settle into his bones. It was a kind of silence that wasn't really silent at all. Small stones shifting under the breeze, the distant cry of a hawk circling high above, the soft exhale of his horse. Then something else. A rustle. Soft but wrong. Wrong enough to straighten every muscle in Luke's back. He tightened the reins. "Easy, boy," he murmured to the horse, who had sensed it too. Luke didn't reach for his gun. Not yet. He knew better than to move quick in Apache territory. Instead, he lifted his chin, pretending to scan the ridge as though he were only admiring the view. That was when the arrow touched his throat. Light as a feather, cold as river stone. "Move slow, cowboy." The voice came from behind him, steady and sharp. Luke froze. The horse snorted anxiously, shifting its weight, but Luke kept perfectly still. "Not look around," the voice warned. "Not unless you want to bleed." Luke nodded once. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "White men always say that," she said, each word clipped with mistrust. "Before trouble begins." He could hear her footsteps now, soft but firm, circling him like someone who knew how to stay alive in harsh lands. She stepped into his peripheral vision, bow drawn, arrow steady. She was young, but not young in the way the settlers meant. She had the look of someone who had endured too many seasons, too many losses. Her long black hair was braided with red and white beads that glimmered faintly in the fading light. Her buckskin dress hung close to her body, decorated with the kind of embroidery that carried stories older than the canyon itself. What struck Luke most wasn't her weapons. It was her eyes, dark, stormbound, and watching him with a mix of suspicion and something he couldn't name yet. "I'm tracking thieves," Luke said gently. "Not Apaches." She studied him for a long moment, as though weighing his soul. "Why come alone?" "Because the trail moves fast," he replied. "And because a friend of mine didn't make it." Her expression flickered. Sympathy, maybe, or recognition of loss, but it vanished quickly behind a wall she had built with care. "My name is Nalinah," she said at last. Luke dipped his head. "Luke Maddox." Nalinah lowered the arrow slowly, though she didn't put away. "You ride on sacred land. Luke Maddox. Many do not leave it alive." "Then maybe you can help me leave it," he answered. Something in his voice, earnest, steady, without fear, made her hesitate in a way she wasn't used to. The wind curled around them, carrying desert dust in a strange, fragile stillness. Her gaze softened by a breath. "Come," she said quietly. "If you die in these canyons, the spirits will blame me." Luke nudged his horse forward, following her deeper into Apache territory. He didn't know yet whether she planned to guide him, test him, or kill him if he proved unworthy. But as she walked ahead of him, shoulders squared and steps sure, he knew one thing. Fate had brought him to her path for a reason he had yet to understand. Night wrapped itself around the canyon like a heavy wool blanket, muted and thick, carrying with it the bite of desert cold. Luke sat near the small fire Nalinah had built beneath an overhang of red stone. The flames were small, almost shy, just enough to warm their hands without throwing light far enough for enemies to spot. He watched her move with a quiet efficiency, gathering wood, grinding herbs, checking the sharpness of her arrowheads. Everything she did was precise, almost ritualistic, as though each action kept chaos from swallowing her whole. She hadn't spoken much since guiding him off the ridge. Luke didn't push. He'd learned long ago that people who had suffered didn't open themselves like doors. They opened like old locks, slow, cautious, and only when they felt safe. He finally broke the silence. "You don't talk much." Her hands paused only a moment before she resumed scraping bark from a stick. "Talking is for those who still have people who listen." Luke felt the weight of that, heavy and aching. Everyone has someone. She shook her head once, sharply. Not anymore. The fire popped softly, sending a few sparks drifting upward like lost stars. Luke studied her face, the tight line of her jaw, the hardness in her eyes that wasn't natural but carved there by life. Nalinah, he said gently, you don't have to say anything you don't want to, but I can see when a person carries hurt. She didn't look at him. Her voice was flat, as if she were reciting a fact rather than sharing a wound. My husband died last winter. Luke swallowed. I'm sorry. She snapped her gaze toward him, fiercer than before. Do not say that. White men say sorry, because it costs nothing. Words are easy. Loss is not. Luke held her stare, refusing to flinch. I know loss, he said softly. A lot of it. Something in her eyes flickered, recognition, maybe a small crack in her armor. She turned back to the fire, staring into the flames' trembling heart. A raiding party from another tribe attacked our settlement. They wanted horses. They wanted blood. Her voice lowered to a deep, wounded whisper. They left me alive only because widows are worthless to them. Luke felt his chest tighten. Before he could speak, she continued, bitterness trembling at the edge of her words. Since then, men come with pity in their faces or hunger in their eyes. They think a woman alone is easy to take, easy to use. She finally looked at him again, and this time it wasn't anger in her eyes, but raw, fragile fear disguised as defiance. So tell me truth, cowboy. Do you only want my body like the others? Luke froze. Not because he was offended, but because the honesty in her question struck deeper than any blade. She wasn't testing him. She was protecting herself. He lowered his voice, steady and real. No, I don't want anything from you except trust. And maybe someone to ride beside if you'd allow it. Her breath caught, a tiny, involuntary sound. Her armor didn't fall, but it shifted, softened. Trust is not something I give. I'm not asking you to, he said. I'll earn it if you let me try. For a long stretch of silence, she didn't look away. Her eyes searched his face for lies, excuses, hidden desire. She found none. Her lips parted as if she might answer. But a sudden shout echoed in the distance. Then another, followed by the unmistakable thunder of hooves, pounding through the canyon. Nalinah was on her feet instantly, bow in hand, her expression sharpening into a warrior's resolve. The thieves, she breathed. They come closer. Luke rose beside her, tightening his gun belt. Then let's end this. She gave him a long look, half challenge, half acceptance. If you want trust, cowboy, she said, drawing an arrow from her quiver, earn it tonight. And together, they slipped into the dangerous darkness, side by side. The moon rose high above the canyon, shining pale silver across the rugged stone as Luke and Nalinah moved like shadows along the ridge. Below them, nestled between two leaning rock spires, flickered a small campfire. Around it, three men lounged carelessly, the stolen cavalry horse tethered nearby, its ears twitching nervously as if sensing justice closing in. Nalinah crouched low, her breath controlled, her bow already strung. Luke knelt beside her, scanning the camp with sharp eyes. He could feel her tension radiating from her like heat. This wasn't just a mission to her. This was something old, something carved deep. The one in the blue coat, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. He raided our settlement years ago. He killed my husband. Luke's jaw tightened. He didn't need to ask how she recognized him. A woman never forgets the face of the man who took her future. We'll handle this together, Luke murmured. It wasn't a promise of vengeance. It was a promise of partnership. She glanced at him, and for one brief moment, her eyes softened, not with affection, but with the relief of not being alone in her fight. Then her expression hardened again, circled to the left. I will cover from above. Luke nodded, slipping along the rocky ledge as silent as a coyote hunting its prey. Each step was deliberate, each breath calculated. Below, the thieves traded jokes and whiskey, unaware that their final night had arrived. Luke reached a vantage point behind a cluster of rocks and slowly drew his revolver. He caught Nalinah, a silhouette above him, steady, poised, lethal. She met his gaze across the distance, gave a single nod, and everything happened at once. Luke fired one clean shot. The closest thief collapsed without a sound, dropping like a sack of grain. The second sprang up, grabbing his gun, but Nalinah's arrow cut through the night air and buried itself deep in his chest. He dropped the weapon before his body hit the ground. The third man, the one in the blue coat, bolted for cover. Luke lunged forward, but the thief was faster, diving behind a boulder as he brandished a knife. The glint of steel flashed under moonlight. "You're dead, Cowboy," he snarled, charging. Luke blocked the first swing, the blade scraping along his leather sleeve. The thief was strong, but desperate, sloppy from drink and adrenaline. Luke twisted his arm, forcing the knife downward, then drove his shoulder into the man's chest. They crashed onto the sand. The man slashed wildly, but Luke grabbed his wrist and wrenched it until bones cracked. The knife clattered away. A moment later, the thief lay still, breathless and defeated. Luke stood, catching his breath as Nalinah approached, bow still drawn in case the man moved again. When she saw him motionless, she finally lowered her weapon. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her face lit by the glow of the dying campfire. But her eyes were something different now. Not cold, not guarded. Something between gratitude and disbelief. "You fought for me," she whispered. Luke wiped dust from his hands. "I fought with you." She stopped just a foot away from him, close enough that he could see the trembling in her hands, the conflict in her gaze. She had built walls around her heart so thick that even she had forgotten what was inside them. But now they cracked. "I judge you quickly," she murmured. Maybe wrongly. Luke reached out slowly, not touching her yet, giving her the choice. "You judge me like anyone would, but I'm still here." She hesitated, then lifted her hand, placing it gently against his cheek. Her touch was soft, almost unsure, as though she feared the world might shatter if she allowed herself this moment. "Maybe," she breathed, "the spirits brought you for a reason." Luke covered her hand with his voice low and sincere. "I'd ride any trail with you, Nalinah." The wind curled around them, carrying the scent of dust and sage as they stood together between the shadows and the moonlight. For the first time since heartbreak had stolen her past, she felt something stir in her chest. Not fear, not pain, but the quiet possibility of hope. "Come," she whispered. "At dawn, I will show you the trail. And maybe something more." Side by side, they walked away from the ruined camp, two wounded souls stepping toward a future neither had expected to find.